Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Iran and Iranian strategy and how Iran is approaching its nuclear goals. And I'm reminded of the great TV ad, "When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen." For those too young to remember commercials from the 70s and 80s, this was the slogan of a wonderful series of television ads for one of the most preeminent stock brokerage firms in the United States.
Well, my broker's E.F. Hutton, and Hutton says, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Fast forward 40 years plus, and every time the name Amos Yadlin is mentioned, that ad flashes through my mind. Yadlin is the former head of Israel's military intelligence. Amos Yadlin is right now living in civilian clothing and is currently a fellow at Harvard. It's important to understand there are many things that Yadlin cannot say. Many subjects he won't dare touch, but he can give insight. Insight's critical. When Amos Yadlin offers his insight, we sure better pay attention and listen, like E.F. Hutton. His insight is always worth dissecting and understanding. Just recently, he participated in a Zoom conversation, a discussion hosted by the Jerusalem Post. The most insightful and worrisome point that Yadlin made during this presentation was that Israel has lost the opportunity to prevent Iran from completing the enrichment track. It plans to develop nuclear capabilities. Simply put, it's too late. Now, he explained, Israel needs to focus on the weaponization track. Israel must stop Iran from creating a weapon and then launching that weapon. According to the former head of Israeli military intelligence, quote here, Israel should make the assumption that maybe we lost the opportunity to stop Iran on the fissile material threat, and we have to concentrate more on the weaponization group, on the weaponization activities. We know where they are, when they were made, be activated, how to stop them. This is serious stuff. That's very sobering truths. Back to the story, and I hope you find comfort in this. Israel will not let Iran attain nuclear weapons. Israel will undoubtedly strike Iran. Yadlin did not explain this part of his equation, so I will. After the inevitable strike, there will be a series of big issues to be dealt with. The first issue is whether or not the United States will militarily join with Israel in their strike against Iran's nuclear weapons, or whether the United States will just lend support. Israel can certainly conduct a strike on its own, but uniting with the United States would ensure greater chance of long-term results and success. Not to mention the always welcome help on the public relations and media front. At this point, given the Biden administration's approach to the Middle East, it looks like the U.S. will lend support to an attack by Israel on Iran, focused on crippling Iranian nuclear weapons capabilities. The United States understands Israel's point of view and will probably give intelligence assistance and tech assistance during and after the strike, but not military support. Israel has already allocated billions of dollars in planning and training to successfully accomplish this task. Most of the money goes to special weapons, both attack weapons and defensive weapons. These weapons are designed to protect Israel from Iran's inevitable counterattack and from the probable attack by Iranian proxies like Hezbollah, headquartered in southern Lebanon. Israel's military will do their best to avoid civilian targets and casualties, but Iran will almost certainly target civilian centers within Israel. So Israel also needs to invest in protecting its citizens from missile and rocket attacks. The next issue concerns Hezbollah. Will Hezbollah do the expected and join in the Iranian counterattack against Israel? They are well prepared, there's no question. Hezbollah has an enormous cache of rockets and missiles that Iran has been providing for them for this very purpose. 6 months ago, I would have said that there is no doubt that Hezbollah will join and jump into the fray. Today, I'm not so certain. Despite Iran's sponsorship of Hezbollah to the tune of about $1 billion per year, Hezbollah no longer sees itself as an organization sponsored by Iran. These terrorists consider themselves to be a political force and the leaders of Lebanon. They consider themselves to be a state and an equal player with Iran and other countries in the region. There's another reason why Hezbollah may not join in Iran's counterattack against Israel, fear and self-preservation. They know that Israel is fully prepared to utterly destroy and uproot Hezbollah if they were to unleash a damaging barrage of missiles and rockets into Israel. Hezbollah has high hopes for their political future. They will not jeopardize those hopes. So, in the end, they will attack Israel, but not by launching thousands of rockets per day. Hezbollah will probably launch a set of symbolic strikes, just enough to placate Iran by making certain that the strikes fall under the threshold of what Israel would consider a massive response. The last big issue is, of course, when. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Ynet. It was written by Ksenia Svetlova and published with permission of Medialine on November 26, 2021. It's entitled, Can Arab Countries Squeeze Iran Out of Syria? Subtitled, Opinion, Helping Syria Restore Stability Through Economic Development will promote a goal of driving Tehran's influence entrenched in Syrian soil, both militarily and economically, out of strategic area. Svetlova is asking a very significant question, and one with tremendous merit. She may be predicting the future. This is how she begins. First, there was the Emirati embassy in Damascus that reopened in 2018. Then a few high-profile Arab delegations met with Syrian diplomats and politicians abroad. And soon, normalization between the Arab world and Bashar Assad became the hottest thing in regional politics. Everyone from Jordan's King Abdullah II to Egyptian and Saudi generals was busy crafting a new path on Syria in order to bring it back into the Arab fold. Back in 2019, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, the UAE's foreign minister, said his country intends to ensure that Syria returns to the Arab region, while Russia, Assad's main backer, called the Arab League to reinstate Syria's membership that was revoked in 2011. Obviously, the Arab world has begun to welcome Syria back into their circle. The question now is, what will the Arab world ask as a price for reconciliation? It already seems that Iran's influence is waning in Syria. Everyone prefers Russia to Iran. This is what expert Raz Zamit said. The column continues in this way, quoting Raz Zamit. The Syrian regime is currently unable to retain control of the territories liberated in recent years without Iranian military involvement, which is therefore not expected to shrink. At the same time, Iran is working to preserve and even strengthen its political, economic, cultural, and religious influence. He continued, although Syria, with Russian support, seems to prefer Russian or Turkish involvement in its economic rehabilitation, this does not stop Iranian efforts to integrate into reconstruction efforts in Syria and at the same time act to strengthen its religious cultural influence, especially in Shiite populated areas, Zamit said. Others are thinking the same. Listen to this. Russia has expressed support for Arab normalization vis-a-vis Damascus, according to Mariana Belikanaya, an expert on Arab affairs and a journalist for Commiserant newspaper and publishing house. Moscow has encouraged the reinstatement of Arab ties with Syria and its readmission into the Arab League for quite a long time, as it believes this will best serve Russian interests in the country. Along with political aspect of normalization, there is also an economic role. Russia needs the Gulf money for Syria's reconstruction, Belikanaya said. Now Svetlova comes to her conclusion and explains the issues of power and control. Will this move allow Iran to be pushed aside, she asks rhetorically. Iran is ingrained in the Syrian soil both militarily and economically. And it's hard to believe that it can be squeezed or pushed out, she says. Theoretically, Russia would be happy to diminish Iran's power, and it's common knowledge that that Iran stands in the way of quite a few issues in Syria, for example, political reconciliation, and provoked Damascus to act in a more aggressive way. For instance, in the Dara region. At the same time, Russia is very realistic. It believes that Iran cannot be pushed out militarily, but its power can be diminished if there will be an alternative, Belinkaya says. The experts agree Arab rapprochement will be gradual and that will take time to achieve an Arab consensus. For now, Qatar has voiced vocal opposition to the move. It's also unclear what price Damascus would need to pay to regain Sunni Arabs' favor and whether it will be willing to actually pay. As for Israel, for now, it's on that preventing Iranian enrichment in Syria will remain unchanged. This is an excellent column. We will be monitoring and watching to see these predictions and whether or not they come true. Next up is a column by Ben-Dror Yemini, and it was published in Ynet, December 5th, 2021. It's entitled, Israel Must Save the Arab Sector from Itself. Opinion: the rampant violence prevalent in Arab community needs to be stopped, and combined efforts by Arab leadership and the government, which should even establish military rule in areas besieged by crime. This is how Ben-Dror Yemini begins. Israel's Arab population has never had a better decade. About 46% of Israeli doctors who received their licenses in 2020 hailed from the Arab sector, be they Muslim, Christian, or Druze. Between 2009 and 2010, the percentage of Arab undergraduate students increased from 13.1 to 19.2%. Now the number of undergraduates in the Arab sector has pretty much caught up with the figures reported in the Jewish sector. This indicates the time and money the government has invested in the sector over the past few years have certainly paid off, and it makes the recent wave of violence in the sector all the more maddening. The violence has now reached East Jerusalem, whose Palestinian residents have become the tip of the spear when it comes to nationality, based on violence. Violence has also become rampant among the Bedouin community in southern Israel, which has turned into a hotbed for Bedouin-run protection rackets and violent crimes, and uncontrollable theft occurring in both private residential homes and military bases. Ben-Dror goes on to describe how the violence and bloodshed is getting worse. He writes, the violence has also spread to the country's Arab population, who is bleeding itself dry with frequent violent blood feuds, as well as countless murders, including the women murdered to protect the family's honor. Israel over the past decade has heeded the calls of various proponents who claimed something must be done to support the Arab sector. It seems, however, that when it comes to crime and nationalistic violence, the results have been nothing but negative. Ben-Dror concludes, offering practical steps to solve the problem. He writes, the police, as well as the military, must recruit those from the sectors who abhor the violence and who understand Israeli Arabs have something to lose in order to effectively establish military rule in areas besieged by violence. As dangerous and as unconventional as it may be, military rule is needed to collect the illegal arms flooding the Negev and bring back the rule of law to the south. Otherwise, the Jewish population there will suffer, not to mention the Arabs, who will most likely end up suffering much more. Something must be done before the situation gets worse for everybody. We must act not against the Arab sector, mind you, but to save it from itself. This is an excellent column. It focuses on the problem and tries to solve it. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons today, and memes. First up is a play on the new COVID variants and compares that to the Vatican. It's very funny. The caption reads, white smoke emanates from the chimney of the Wuhan lab, signaling that a new variant has been named. Why is it so funny? Because the Vatican's College of Cardinals succeeds in deciding the new Pope. They send out a message by way of white chimney smoke. This next is a hilarious read. It's a meme. There's been a rash of thefts in California, and the thieves are calculating prices. They actually bring calculators or their phones to do it. The state law will not prosecute theft that is $950 and under. So the meme reads, California shop owner prices all items at $951 so thieves can be prosecuted. Funny. Next, a real news story about evangelical preacher Joel Osteen and his megachurch. Headline reads, plumber finds cachet of money behind loose toilet in wall at Joel Osteen's megachurch. They actually found $600,000. there, if you can imagine that. Next up is a play on Judgment Day in heaven. Someone appears before the heavenly judge. The judge looks at him and says here, you should go to hell. But since you've been a PhD, we'll count that as time served. That's a funny one. Next, we have a sign that uses the associative property in math. Beer equals hops, hop equals plants, plants equal salad, salad equals beer. Sit down and have a few salads. These last two memes make fun of fitness and gyms and programs. The first reads, I just paid for a 12-month gym membership. My bank called to see if my credit card was stolen. With all the 1-month and 2-month deals being offered, who pays for 12-month memberships? Last up reads, I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd wake up early in the morning to exercise. I was right. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. There was something that used to happen a lot, and now it's happening again. What is it? A Hamas member was killed when the tunnel he was digging collapsed on him. It was not clear if the tunnel was new or if he was digging an older tunnel that had been destroyed and he was clearing that one out and refurbishing it. That's unclear right now. What is essential in this story is that the tunnels are still being dug by Hamas. Tunnels have two purposes. Purpose one is to attack Israel. Purpose two is to protect Hamas leadership who seek protection from Israeli air attacks in the tunnels. Whatever its purpose, we have another example of what appears to be Hamas readying for another confrontation with Israel. Continuing along the same vein, as tensions between Hamas and Israel heat up, Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid traveled to Egypt to meet with his counterpart and other government and military and intelligence officials. This was a critical move. Egypt is the go-between for Hamas and Israel. It's not that Hamas and Egypt are best friends. They're not even allies. But the relationship is good enough to send and receive messages and to host indirect talks through them. So Israel, through Lapid, is sending a message to Hamas through Egypt. That message is stand down, do not embark on a campaign to draw Israel into conflict. Because if you don't stand down, you will draw Israel into the conflict, and that conflict will cause tremendous pain, tremendous losses to Gaza. Egypt is doing its job. Hamas has been warned. Another assassination attempt against Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was intercepted. The bomb was discovered under the car of one of the members of Erdogan's security team. It was disarmed. The plan was obvious, to blow up the security car as it drove close to the president. The Turkish president was not in danger. Sappers disarmed the bomb way in advance of any real threat. But the incident is telling. While there are numerous external threats to the life of the Turkish president, those external threats pale in comparison to the domestic threats against Erdogan, the president of Turkey. Turkey is a democracy, but Erdogan has utilized his position, his power, and his police authority to stifle opposition, especially opposition voiced by secular student protesters. To put it mildly, there's a great deal of local discontent in Turkey. A great deal. Israel and the United States have thus far avoided serious conflict. There are, however, some very looming disagreements between the two nations. While each side has voiced their objections, they have been voiced, for the most part, behind closed doors. But the conflicts might be too big to keep quiet or hidden anymore. The United States is very angry with Israel for having moved ahead on building thousands of homes in an area which they made a promise to the United States that they would not build. Israel, meanwhile, cannot fathom how naive the United States and the Western world nations are, the other Western nations are, regarding Iran and Iranian nuclear plans. The idea of opening a consulate in Jerusalem to service Palestinians is a bone of tremendous tension also. Israel's advancing and reaching out to China does not make the U.S. happy. Neither does the discovery of Israeli spy software that has been used to spy on allies, even the United States. Only so many issues can be kept behind closed doors. Eventually, frustration reaches the boiling point, and someone runs to the press. We are almost there. United States Secretary Antony Blinken traveled to Eastern Europe recently. He went to Riga, the capital of Latvia, where he convened a meeting with his NATO colleagues to discuss burning issues on the international agenda. The elephant in the room is Russia. Russia has amassed troops on the border of Ukraine. Everyone is asking if or when Russia will invade Ukraine. The answer is dependent on the United States. In 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. At that time, the United States' response was lukewarm, tepid at best. 7 years later, Blinken is doing his best to sound intimidating. He's proclaiming the United States must stop Russia. Here are Blinken's comments. Now, we've seen this playbook before in 2014, when Russia last invaded Ukraine. Then, as now, the significantly increased combat forces along the border. Then, as now, they intensified disinformation to paint Ukraine as the aggressor, to justify pre-planned military action. Now we don't know whether President Putin has made the decision to invade, he said. We can know that he is putting in place the capacity to do so in a short order, should he decide. So despite uncertainty about intentions and time, we must prepare for all contingencies while working to see to it that Russia reverses course. Russia will evaluate, and then Russia will act. According to mainstream media coverage, the new COVID-19 variant, which is actually officially called B.1.1.529, aka Omicron, is thought to have come from South Africa. But Omicron was detected actually in the Netherlands on November 19th and on November 23rd also. That's a week before it was discovered in South Africa. The point is, Omicron has been found all over the world. Israel has several dozen Omicron patients, including 2 doctors. One doctor infected the other, his colleague. The first doctor was infected at a medical conference in England and brought the variant back to Israel. We still do not know enough about Omicron, but we do know that while symptoms have been more mild than previous variants, experts are certain that we are not as well protected from this variant as we have been from previous variants. Note, by the way, Omicron is the Greek letter for O. Not that it means anything. The people are shooting out over it. It's a letter. The music group Black Eyed Peas performed in Israel. The group chose to support Israel despite tremendous public pressure to cancel from BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions supporters. Black Eyed Peas lead singer will.i.am said that supporters of the Palestinian-led boycott campaign against Israel would not deter him from performing in the Jewish state, nor will it deter him from investing in its booming high-tech industry. Before their Jerusalem concert, frontman will.i.am, along with 2 other members of the group, gave a statement to the Associated Press saying, "I'm a musician and a tech enthusiast, and people like our music." will.i.am added, "I do not turn my back on people that live here because of their politics. No, that's not the way we were built. So, there's beautiful people here, as well as beautiful people in Palestine. And one day we want to go there too." Black Eyed Peas seems to understand the issues of the region. Kudos to Black Eyed Peas. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the Jewish population in the world today is just about 15,600,200? That's a big number, 15 million. This is an increase of about 90,000 people from last year. Of those, 94% of the Jews in the world live in 2 countries. They are, of course, the United States and Israel. The United States has more Jews than Israel. 7.3 million in the United States, 6.943 in Israel. So about 300,000 Jew difference in numbers. In the next few years, that will change, and Israel will become the country with the most Jews. There's no question about that. They're just growing faster. One of the reasons I spend so much time and energy on Jew hatred, especially Jew hatred in the United States, is because so many Jews live in the United States. If that hatred can manifest itself and percolate in the United States, where there are 7 million Jews, imagine how careful Jews living elsewhere must be. Let's be careful out there. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.